Today's video begins 2:59 p.m. Pacific, September the 24th. It's going to end in 2028. Let me explain. As of that time, Sony are about to release a 40-minute long video to the world, and organization-wide excitement for new reveals undoubtedly comes with a tinge of anxiety. That's because by now, Sony are feeling the disease of victory. The console generation is indisputably theirs. Microsoft is defeated, but the PS5 Pro was just mocked by their audience. The Helldivers 2 PSN debacle stripped away goodwill. Horizon Forbidden West took a PR hit over dodgy cross-gen versions only for Elden Ring to appear and perform alchemy. Suddenly, it wasn't Horizon Forbidden West, it was Horizon Forbidden Sales. Tweets from a few employees at its studio end up sparking a media firestorm, and all of this as we see Jim Ryan's live service plan crash and burn, Bungie decline, and most recently Concord do immense damage. And we may think that's mostly financial damage. Literally, it is, but in truth, I think it's actually far worse. What it did is it broke the seal of approval. It shattered their own version of Nintendo's famous seal of quality. The idea that they are tastemakers, that got broken because they just served up something that people didn't like. So even when we have Astrobot, an absolutely stunningly good game, should be a free win, what it ends up doing is psychologically highlighting the contrast between the old school, the inventive Japan-led Sony and the bumbling live service movie game Sony, characterized by more recent American leadership. Or to put it in other terms, once you become president or prime minister, it's often only downhill from there. Wins or flukes, losses are your responsibility, and Microsoft, fresh off spending billions, is finally going to have games. But before Sony could even answer with that 40-minute video, the worst type of leak happened. A leak that confirmed every fear and suspicion. Horizon Zero Dawn Remaster. This leaked via the ESRB just 2 days before State of Play, just when Sony's fortnight-long "it's so over, we're so back" cycle seemed to have ended. And that was that. People looked at this and thought, really? That's it? There's nothing new? No big game? No new reason to be excited? Here they are doing yet another remaster of a 7-year-old game that doesn't need remastering, probably thinking it's going to be thrown at us at full price, just like with The Last of Us. And right as that leaked, rumors began to swirl that Concord was Herman Hulst's baby. Herman, who of course took over leadership from Jim Ryan. That, again, shattered faith that the future could be good. And that's why at 2:59, right before State of Play is going to go live, it must have been tense, because they knew they had to do the impossible. They had to truly change the narrative. Cutting through all the noise and bringing you the news in context is literally our mission here, and if you want more of that, go to bellular.games. Over there, you will get our videos ad-free. You'll get our research reports, and every day you'll get a fresh edition of Loading Screen. What we do is we sift through all the news, all the releases, we bring it together, put it in context, and we keep you in the loop daily so you can sit back and be in the loop, free from algorithms messing about your life. And in doing so, you support our mission and you support my team. That means a lot to me. Okay, let's talk about Sony. There is no Bloodborne remaster, but yes, Horizon Zero Dawn is remastered. This time though, it's a little bit different because it will cost $49.99, not $69.99. That's welcome versus the past, but not necessarily narrative changing. What could though is Ghost of Yotei. This is coming out 2025. We've got a new protagonist, new location, and thrillingly, 1603. The Sengoku period. You have characters like Oda Nobunaga, Tokugawa Ieyasu, the legendary samurai Hattori Hanzo, and for many of us, the setting of the best historical Total War game ever made. It's a fascinating period, a crossroad in Japanese history. Who will rule? How will they rule? And what of all those strange, funny Christians with their strange ways and big boats? But in a way, there's a problem with all that. Number one, it's the obvious place to go, but number two, it's of a massive scale, and it would be quite hard to pull off. Take Ghost of Tsushima. That did so well because it was focused on a small island, a small setting, a personal story. And what stands out to me is that Sucker Punch have not forgotten that's the strength of their game. So this next game is set in the north, right? The big northern island called Kaido. At the time, it was called Ezo by its inhabitants, and it was a very distinct place to the sort of main bits of Japan that we know of today. If you play Shogun 2 Total War in the regular map set in the 1500s, 1600s, well, you'll see that Hokkaido is actually not on the map. The map ends at northern Honshu, and that's because at that time Hokkaido was actually a very distinct place. The people who live there are of the Ainu ethnicity, not the Yamato ethnicity that actually makes up the vast majority of modern Japan. Now, of course, by the time of the fall of the samurai campaign in the 1800s, Lower Hokkaido is on the map in Shogun 2. That makes sense because it had came under Japanese control. Now, at the time of this game setting, the Japanese do of course have relations, but the Ainu to the north are sort of seen as like gruff barbarian types. In the trailer, we see a focus on the gorgeous landscapes. We see our character very much being cast as synergistic with nature, I would say. So overall, putting it together, what I'm seeing is a revenge plot. It feels like a bit of a Western, obviously a Frozen one, and to me, that seems like they've been able to move this franchise forward, but in a way that doesn't forget what actually made Tsushima successful, which was being smaller, having personal stakes, and good focus. That could be pretty big. Now, wrapping things on the Sony side, we see LEGO Horizon get a release date, and there's some new free Astrobot DLC. On a personal note, if you want a game to make you feel like a child again, just get Astrobot. It's basically better than most could have hoped for. So that all seems good, but what it didn't do was say, hello audience, the next few years are going to be amazing, here's how. Now, we already knew some things for 2025, like Death Stranding 2, and no doubt Kojima's ability to just call the player game buy man and just have us all buy his game will still work. Yeah, he's too strange for some people, but his games are utterly unique. Xbox will not have an answer because nobody makes them like that. Of course, it's not a first-party game. Sony do not own Kojima Productions, but it absolutely is an exclusive and one that feels like a Sony first party. There are then 5 other first parties that are confirmed but were not present at State of Play. We've got, of course, Insomniac's Wolverine game. I think that will move the needle. It's been cooking for a while, and it's a beloved character. I mean, my colleagues know him from comics and the 2000s movies. I know him from Logan, a movie I will never forget. I think this could be absolutely massive. And there are then live service titles. First party, we've got Fair Games from Haven, and then we've got Marathon from Bungie, and there are some other exclusives. Convallaria is a live third-person shooter. There's Lost Soul Aside, a Final Fantasy 15-inspired action RPG from a new Chinese studio, founded literally to build that game that reportedly had a prototype so impressive that Sony signed them. Now, to be clear, the State of Play did have more, and a lot of it was exciting. More Alan Wake 2, that's great. Legacy of Kain, Soul Reaver 1 and 2 remaster, which actually looks good. And then the likes of Hell Is Us finally being seen again. It's a moody action game in a war-torn world with properly unsettling looking foes and peak vibes. The Midnight Walk looks absolutely gorgeous. Monster Hunter Wilds will destroy everybody's early 2025, but it'll do so in a cross-platform fashion. So, State of Play was 40 minutes of most flavors of peak video game. But a lot of it was not exclusive, and Sony did not dangle a future vision, and in order to fix their ailing narrative, they need a future vision. They need people to think it's more than just 1 or 2 things in a bunch of remasters. But while Sony were not able to do that, we can put together the pieces, and when we do, it turns out we know a lot. The big perception is that Sony just have no games. But is that their track record? Let's actually look and see what they've done. When we do, we see 1 to 2 major releases every year, along with at least 2 remakes or remasters. Demon's Souls, Spider-Man remasters, Tsushima and Death Stranding director's cuts, Last of Us Part 1, Uncharted Collection, and of course the 2024 Horizon Zero Dawn and Last of Us Part 2 remastered, along with Until Dawn, which also got a remaster. It's a pretty clear strategy. They make investments in big system-selling games to launch a system, maybe sell some Pro Edition consoles, and then have a remaster that helps launch their next generation console. Looking through the years, 2022 was the final one of truly gargantuan new releases, or at least multiple of them. We had Ragnarok, Forbidden West, and Gran Turismo, and that was also the end of the cross-gen games. But then we hit 2023, that's where things go weird for Sony. Spider-Man 2 is there, and it did sell big, and then there is MLB. But that was it. They just did not have that much. Had they truly ran out of steam? Was the pipeline dry? Well, they were doing a lot of work. They were porting loads of things over to Steam, but I get the point. It absolutely seemed they went hard with investments to secure the next console generation, but then midway through, didn't have things to put on that console. But another part of their strategy also backfired. Sony stopped talking. You see, Ragnarok was talked about way before it came out. It of course got delayed, but not before people purchased PS5s. Add to that rocky internal projects and their live service slate being slashed, and we see that change of strategy. Mid-cycle, the utility of selling the future is a little bit diminished because you're no longer having to fight John Halo, and of course at the time they didn't know that John Halo was a paper tiger. But then, and likely worse than just not having games, Sony took the void that they created and they filled it with their own bad news. The live service plans, large studio cuts, even to their winners. 2024's The Last of Us Part 2 Remastered, which, yeah, was timed with the show's success, but wasn't new. I mean, that was a very new game. Why is it being remastered? Then, they narratively detach themselves from some of their wins. Take the success of Helldivers 2. Well, they kind of squandered the PR wins that they could have had with PSN because they looked like the bad guy who basically had just got control of Arrowhead. And then there's the Until Dawn remaster. That was great, but as that remaster came out, well, the studio co-founders had left and 90 people were cut from the studio, and then there's the likes of Concord that mean that even the wins of Astro feel like they are in spite of who Sony currently are being. Part of the story is obviously that things did not go as Sony planned. Live services absolutely have to have been planned for 2023. The gap in releases just doesn't make any sense. And the likes of The Last of Us and the Horizon remasters wouldn't seem like just remasters if the planned multiplayer projects actually existed. Contrast state of play and what we know to the past, and then let's see how their plan rolls on. 2 to 3 remasters a year, 1 to 2 big first-party titles. If reports are true, they thought that Concord would cover 2024. But if we start from 2025, in some ways it could be a return to form. And according to the leaks, it's going to start what is always the greatest era of every console generation. That's where the future gets interesting. We now understand that Microsoft expects to be fighting the PS6 in 2028. That means an 8-year console cycle with a Pro console in the middle. It's a pattern we all know, we've all seen. What happens is ambitious projects kicked off at the start of a console cycle finally bear fruit towards the end. And historically, that is what Sony have built their brand on. The Last of Us, God of War, Spider-Man, Tsushima, all things that happened late in the respective console generation. That always risks a wobbly middle of the generation, but here even worse because games are more expensive to make than ever, they take longer to make than ever, and spiky revenue from big hits is hard to work with as a business. That's why we see remakes, remasters, live service ambitions, and exclusive publishing deals with third parties to do, say, Stellar Blade and Rise of the Ronin. So at least by the calendar, Sony are almost where their strategy is traditionally strongest, but this time it's actually a little bit different. The Last of Us Part 3 almost certainly will not be out until the next console generation. That's because Naughty Dog have got another game first that apparently is a new IP and a high fantasy setting, which is something we rarely see Naughty Dog-like production values on. At the very least, that could be interesting, and they could establish something big and new. At least strategically, that's what they want. Then The Last of Us Part 2's TV show is going to be spread across multiple seasons. Often you hear that and you think, oh dear, they're going to milk it, but to be honest, in this case, The Last of Us Part 2 was double the length of Part 1, and I think the TV show will probably be able to tell that story better than the game did. And so multiple seasons of the show will keep that brand strong right when they're able to use the swan song period of this generation to launch a new IP. It's confirmed they have the same ambitions for Ghost. Yote expands it to an era that is fit for more stories, right? It's a large time span, not just one short Mongol misadventure, although that Mongol misadventure covered by Ghost of Tsushima is perfect for film, and it's actually being directed by Chad Stileski, who is the guy who helmed all 4 John Wick movies. Makes sense when you think about the plot of that game. Now, their CEO Herman Hulse said that this all makes business sense. Obviously, he wasn't really right about that on the Concord front, but in terms of film and stuff, he probably has the numbers. The Last of Us Part 1 and 2 on PS5 were never of interest to me because, well, I already played them, they were basically the same. But we do know that the TV show surged the sales. And this then explains the Horizon remaster. This was no doubt greenlit with these ambitions in mind, and probably with a PS6 remaster of Forbidden West planned as well. But of course, reality makes a mockery of plans, and that happened to the Horizon television show. It was being done with Netflix, and June 2024 saw the showrunner Steve Blackman of Fargo, Altered Carbon, and Umbrella Academy exit after reports of a long history of toxic, bullying, manipulative, and retaliatory behavior, if I'm to quote one source. Now, it's not dead, it's just on hold, so I absolutely think Sony will continue multimedia plans for Horizon. You might think, why are they doing all of this? I mean, there's the obvious, it can make money, but Deeper than that, it's external capital. The Last of Us is a HBO show. It's one that probably also benefits from Canadian film incentives where it's filmed, just like how Game of Thrones benefited from local agency support in my home of Northern Ireland. It's one of the things that wins a location the bid for a big new picture. With deals like this then, Sony gets to grow its brand, its premium image, and its game sales, all supported by external funding. They can make a television show in great part with HBO's money. That dilutes risk. And while The Last of Us made some headlines with its first season costing $10 to $15 million an episode, which is more than most Game of Thrones episodes up to like season 6, well, $150 million for a season is literally half the budget of Spider-Man 2. And in great part, it's somebody else's $150 million. I think you can see how that looks good to Sony. Parsing that, what I at least see is a strategy, a plan, something that could actually work and that does have a track record of working, even though, yes, there has been drama and Sony have absolutely made mistakes. But look at their opponent, look at Microsoft. They took Halo, probably their biggest brand, and they burnt it to the ground. They tried to grow it in ways that just commodified the Halo brand, that cheapened it, and then they commodified themselves using Game Pass, something they've now had to turn away from with the rebranding of its prices. And sure, Microsoft now have games, but audiences are at least angry at Sony. You're only angry at something because you care, or you hope it could return to what it used to mean to you. With Microsoft, that anger, I think, is gone. There's been too much bad news and not enough good in between. People now are apathetic. That is the hardest thing to overcome. An apathetic Microsoft fan will just not bother or not remember to watch their big game showcase. An angry Sony fan, even if they hate watch the state of play, there is a chance a little bit of the old Sony could crawl through, be that Tsushima, be that Astrobot, and that at least could get that person to move in the direction of Sony. Whereas at best, Microsoft are just a bit of a joke. So look, if you want to see something else that's a bit of a joke, there's more of Concord that you should actually know. Yes, Concord was made by Firewalk, but guess what? Firewalk was incubated within another company, and it's that company that Sony acquired Concord from. And that means that while Sony did lose a lot of money, and Concord was undoubtedly pretty expensive to make, somebody else played business well and almost certainly came out, at least relatively speaking, on top. It's a crazy story, and you can watch it next.